Welcome to the Clear Lens podcast with me, Audrey Kissan. I hope this will be a place where you can get clarity on what's really going on in the world. We're at an inflection point, and it is pretty clear that bias and misinformation are eroding the public's trust in news media. It can be so tempting to tune out, but I really hope you don't. I hope you tune in here instead. I hope you listen in on the chats I'll be having with experts, leaders and advocates who really are passionate about giving you more clarity. Clarity on important issues facing us all today. So yeah, Daragh, we were just saying there about this article that shook us based on, I suppose, new insights about the scale of Ireland's trade with Israel and how it comes at a time where the solidarity movement in Ireland is so it's growing. It's so vocal. Ireland is considered one of Palestine's closest allies, definitely in Europe, but it also makes an impression on a global level. And our own history, our own memory of a long colonial past means that we identify with the oppressed. That is our identity. We're still occupied in 6 counties. And to learn, as we did in this article, that actually our identity is a bit different to what we think it is. It's like the neoliberal structure of our economy is set up in such a way to support imperialism, not to have a principled stand against it. And I suppose we could start with your thoughts on that, our identity versus the reality.
And I think that's like something not only regarding Palestine that people are increasingly feeling. Because I think like even with the Palestinian solidarity movement, I think another big positive of that has been that people are actually really reconnecting with their roots, with our shared history, with our decolonial struggle. Even for me, actually, I've found lots of incredible documents and artifacts from my own family history, going back to the War of Independence, going back to the Civil War. And it's been something really nice to see in Ireland, on one hand, is kind of people reconnecting with this identity and with this struggle, as well as kind of also on a cultural level too. I think even now you see it in like the Irish music scene, for example. I live in Barcelona, so I was just at Primavera this weekend. And all of the Irish acts were just brilliant. They really made a big point of Palestine. They had it present either with the flags or with what they said or things on the screen. All of the Irish people there was Palestine flags everywhere.
Brilliant.
And it's been something that's been great to watch and great to be a part of and to experience. At the same time, there's this huge just feeling of contradiction and of dissonance between the people and the government. And for me as like a younger person, this is something like all of us have kind of felt for a long time. But I think it was treated too much as an isolated incident or like the housing crisis in particular. And it hasn't really necessarily been properly connected in the same way to the structure itself. That why is it we have this housing crisis? Why is it we have 15,000 plus people sleeping on the streets, including thousands of children? Why is it that we have 70,000 plus in emergency accommodation? Why is it that our government, despite the kind of rhetoric and the promises, is saying one thing on Palestine and doing the other? And all of these things, for those of us that have really kind of been paying attention, I feel there's just been this growing divide between what's being said and what's happening.
Yeah.
So that was kind of one of the things I was trying to do with this article is really try to highlight the space between these two things and then also try to explain why from a structural position, connecting it to this kind of neoliberal government, connecting it to the kind of capitalist world system as a whole and trying to kind of analyze better the flows, like not only isolated to Ireland or our government, but what role are we playing in the world system?
Yes.
Similar to the role that people are questioning that Israel are playing in the world system under US hegemony in a world capitalist system, and trying to kind of take that approach to understanding what is actually going on from a materialist lens and kind of trying to work from there.
Yes, and that's it. It, I suppose, shatters the illusion that we are as different from Israel as we think we are, as we feel, of course, that we are. That when you
Hmm.
look at the structures, and you mentioned in your article, we both serve, we're both client states in a sense to US. Um, Interests, the US empire.
Mhm.
We have different functions within that, but both of them fundamentally are to facilitate US capitalist power.
Yeah.
We do it. Our economies are deeply entrenched. That was gut wrenching to read, and not just that they're entrenched, but the sheer scale of it. I mean, on
Yeah.
the one hand, we think we are diametrically opposite, like Ireland, a colonised nation, standing in solidarity with the oppressed, really proud of our human rights advocacy across the world,
Mm.
our image of all of that. And then, you know, juxtapose that with Israel, we're all horrified at the scale of the human rights atrocities we're seeing. We should
Hmm.
be totally separate in all ways, but materially, we're actually very, very deeply entrenched. And you pointed it out really well in this article using the trade figures. So, for example, in 2018, the OTB was first introduced. So,
Hmm.
this was a first attempt led by Senator Francis Black to end our complicity in, you know, the illegal occupation. And what we see is the polar opposite. We see
Hmm.
Irish trade skyrocketing. Um, and the figures are just, you know, even just how they flip. So I wrote down
Yeah.
in 2018, for example, we ran a trade surplus with Israel. We
Hmm.
sold 1.2 billion in pharmaceuticals and machinery. And then by 2024, in the years where Israel was expanding its settlements on an unprecedented level, we were scaling up our trade, and we had flipped it to the extent that we were now buying more from Israel than ever before. So,
Hmm.
really doing Israel a lot of favors in terms of the economy. This is the part that people are really, really shook by.
Yeah.
The timing of this, uh, how sinister it all looks, and you know what is being bought and who is it being bought by. And you had some
Mhm.
thoughts on that in the article.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think that timing, I think, is a really important thing to keep in mind in terms of the different influences in the Irish economy. So, when the bill was first introduced in 2018 and also actually passed bipartisan
Hmm.
by all parties in 2018. Really, because at that time, I guess the government were happy to kind of make this what they probably felt and what they're still trying to do is try to make it a symbolic gesture as some sort of concession to show that they're kind of socially liberal and willing to make these changes. So in the article, I also connected this a bit to, for example, gay marriage referendum, for example,
Yes.
the abortion referendum. And these were all kind of things that I think really the Irish population very much kind of bought into and said, actually, okay, maybe in terms of our living standards, maybe in terms of cost of living, these are things that are going in the wrong direction. And I think, particularly with young people, this was something that was difficult to get over. At the same time, like I was in college during these years, and it was like kind of the feeling was, okay, actually, at least the government are kind of willing to play ball on some things, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
The thing is that these were things that didn't threaten capital in some way. They were kind of ways to give kind of social concessions to the population in a way that sort of masked what was actually going on behind the scenes materially.
Mm.
So in 2018, once this bill was passed by Senator Francis Black, essentially what almost immediately happened was the US tech companies started dramatically scaling up their collaboration with Israeli suppliers. So this was primarily done through electronics, microchips. Ireland is now the biggest consumer of Israeli microchips in the world, circuit boards and things like this that we were sourcing from elsewhere. And this seems to have been somewhat of a deliberate strategy from the US government to preserve Israeli legitimacy within Europe and to prevent any precedent from being set within the European Union. So with that, in the years after 2018 to now, the uh, scale of trade in terms of imports from Israel has increased by 600%.
Yeah.
So it went from less than a billion to over 3.2 billion. We were the second biggest importer on earth, only behind the US, and per person, actually 12 times as much than the US. So
It's just
per
terrifying.
capita, every Irish person, and what's so infuriating and disgraceful about this is all of the Irish people I know have really made big efforts in terms of boycotts, in terms of divestments, in terms of ensuring that they absolutely minimize their complicity in genocide, in apartheid, in illegal occupation, and to learn this, that what was actually kind of going on behind the scenes with direct collaboration between the US government, Irish government, Israeli government, as well as US tech corporations in Ireland, as well as pharmaceutical ones, is just such a kick in the teeth, I think, to so many people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't only just through the tech companies it was happening, it was also through the US ambassador to Ireland. It was the Apple executives who both had direct meetings with Irish politicians. Both Simon Coveney and Pascal Donoghue both gave promises that this occupied territories bill wasn't going to pass as early as 2019. They promised this, confirmed this with ambassadors. And then fast forward 6 years later, what eventually pushes through, despite election promises only last year, where they
Mm.
essentially lied to the entire Irish population, claiming that they were going to pass the original Occupied Territories
Yes.
bill, which were for goods and services. They just pushed through goods. And that's because goods only made up about 15% of the trade. And the services were mostly cloud data storage, which are the big Microsoft. They have the Microsoft Azure, and through that, they actually fully support Israeli surveillance, facial recognition, AI in illegally occupied territories in the West Bank and in Gaza. Also, with Google and Amazon, they were part of Project Nimbus, which is this incredibly exploitative digital surveillance contract given out in 2021. And these are the services which are now being conveniently left out, where under these services as well, it's actually possible that Irish data centers are storing information illegally obtained in illegally occupied territories about Palestinian people who are being murdered by Israel. Potentially, this data is being stored in Ireland. We don't even know, actually.
This is horrifying.
Hmm.
And it isn't a stretch to imagine that that is exactly what could be happen given
Hmm.
the data that we do have about.
Hmm.
Um, this is horrifying, and it's that further kind of. divide between the Irish public, our efforts, as you said, to boycott, to do what we can and take whatever power we can, and really honestly believing that we were going to make an impact. While behind the
Mhm.
scenes, you have this collaboration in secret um, to do the very, very opposite and actually um, to enhance the very structures that the OTB sought to kind of dismantle.
Yeah.
So it's really sinister, and I think what people really want to get a view of, because we don't, we're kind of a bit starved of this perspective and this information in the mainstream.
Mhm. Mhm.
What does that look like behind the scene? What do these lobbyists look like? What are the trade bodies in Ireland? And just a window into that for the public and how
Mhm.
that works.
Yeah, to be honest, in terms of like lobby groups and things like this, I'm still actually trying to understand a lot of that myself. So with
Mm,
this information in this article, like most of the research was actually done by the amazing people at the Ditch. I think
yes, they're
it's
incredible.
great that even like when you talk about the mainstream media, I also think. And it's something I kind of regretted not maybe addressing more directly in the article after I published it was the complete and utter failure of the Irish mainstream media with regards to their coverage of the genocide. That's from RTE to the broadsheets. And
Hmm.
why is it that this tiny team at the Ditch have been able to uncover 10 times as much as every other publication combined, you know? Because
Yeah,
just because they're the only ones trying.
exactly.
And with that, then, in terms of the kind of influences, from what I've been kind of able to gather so far, is kind of this combination of US diplomats and,
Hmm.
in particular, this woman, Claire Cronin, who was the US ambassador to Ireland, who threatened Ireland directly with significant consequences if
Yes.
Ireland was to pass the Occupied Territories Bill. And that's a very significant threat because US corporations in Ireland make up over 50% of our corporate tax.
Hmm.
80% of Ireland's corporate tax in general comes from foreign multinationals. And yeah, over half of that are US ones. I think even with Apple alone, it's close to 30%. And it was Apple executives who went directly to Irish government officials and essentially threatened them if Ireland was to implement this.
Hmm.
So it's through kind of this kind of political corporate
Chokehold.
influence, chokehold, I think, yes, is the right word to use. That the kind of primary influence happens, and then that's kind of spread out through different groups, even including, for example, the is it the IDA in
Yep.
Ireland, who
Yep.
have been very directly involved in, for example, Ireland-Israeli trade relationships, including Irish government purchasing military equipment from Israeli weapons
Yep.
companies. I think over 15 million euro in drone equipment, even as well. And this is kind of the primary threat. Because even, for example, when Micheál Martin went to the White House for Paddy's Day, Trump kind of made this big song and dance over the pharmaceuticals. And
Yeah.
behind the tech companies, it's the pharmaceuticals who actually have the biggest links with Israeli companies. And these kind of thinly veiled jabs of like, toe the line of empire, or we
Hmm.
take our multinationals back. And actually, after this discussion and whatever was decided between Micheál Martin and Trump regarding the Ireland-Israeli-US sort of nexus, uh, pharmaceuticals were actually left off the tariff list. And
Mm.
I think that sort of says something about what sort of agreement was actually came to when you saw that treatment relative to maybe the treatment of some other leaders of different countries that received actually very bad treatment in the White House because of the importance of Ireland as well as Israel as sort of nodes in the capitalist world system that the
Mm.
US ruling class really depend on for different functions, whether in Ireland it's as the kind of onshore tax haven, or Israel as a way of essentially dividing the Arab world and acting as sort of this sort of military outpost and producer of surveillance technology and other things.
Mm. Yeah, it's I suppose it could lead you to despair if you thought about, this chokehold and the extent of it and how deeply embedded and dependent our economy is on the US. And I think that the scale of what we have seen happening, it's been live streamed. None of us have ever been subjected to
Hmm.
this sheer evil, the scale of it. Um, we've I think so many people I've spoken to myself in the movement, we're fundamentally changed by it. Like all illusions have been stripped bare. We have
Yeah.
seen extermination of a people, and we want to do anything that we can to end it. But understanding our complicity is a huge part of that, and
Yeah.
ending it is pretty seismic given what we know now about how these structures are set up.
Yeah.
And what we need, I guess, is an alternative vision for that. And what does that look like? Because you will have, I suppose, a cohort in society that maybe hasn't been as impacted by what is happening in Palestine by virtue of the fact that they have either tuned out because it was
Hmm.
too much, or, they're trusting a mainstream media which has been absolutely diabolical in its coverage. That is a focus of mine,
Hmm. Yeah.
monitoring the media. My background is in journalism,
Hmm.
and I work with like lots of different groups and a team in Pals for Palestine. They've recently done a study like proving beyond a doubt, the bias, and there's just so
Hmm.
much instance of it. So I suppose there's a cohort, as strong as solidarity is in Ireland, you will still have a cohort of people that don't know the full picture or don't have the full picture here.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have a highly kind of, I suppose, awakened cohort, and all of that needs to kind of marry together. And I think it goes back to what you're saying at the start, like what we're learning about our structures and neoliberalism
Hmm.
unites us across more issues than Palestine.
Yeah.
This is it's a working class issue,
Yeah.
because the pain of an economy structured like this, we think, oh God, our good jobs from the US, or where would we be without them?
Hmm.
We're not benefiting, the average Joe Soap, from this wealth
Yeah.
that is being generated here.
Hmm.
And what you said in your article as well, we're paying for it. This colonial double dealing, as you put it, we're
Hmm.
paying for it with a housing crisis, a healthcare system that is buckling, and being a global disgrace as these kind of disinformation is coming to light about the scale of our complicity. So how do we reimagine our way? Like, how do we create a vision for how we get out of this, really? Or how do you see that?
Yeah, so in the article, what I kind of tried to highlight is that really this struggle is almost first and foremost a battle really for democracy and sovereignty.
Yeah.
And I use the examples even of the Irish famine as an example of this, as this was a time where we didn't have our sovereignty, we didn't have democracy. And as a result of that, millions were allowed to starve despite there being actually twice as much food as would be necessary to feed the entire population.
Mhm.
And this was as a result, I was quoting James Connolly from Labour in Irish History in this, of essentially just prioritizing capitalist principles above the intrinsic value of human life. Can't remember
Yeah.
the exact quote.
Mm.
And it's really this that is still happening to this day, where this this value of human life still hasn't yet been elevated to its rightful position at the top of the pecking order. You just need to walk around Dublin and see how many homeless people there are there to understand that in seconds, you know?
Yes.
where we have supposedly the wealthiest economy we've ever had in history, one of the wealthiest economies per person any country has ever had in history. And nobody seems to be able to tell us where this money goes,
Mm-hmm.
who it goes to, what it's spent on, because much poorer countries can give free healthcare. Ireland doesn't
Yeah.
do that.
Mm-hmm.
Much poorer countries can give social housing. Ireland doesn't do that. Much poorer countries, look at Yemen, have been
Yeah.
able to say, we are going to prioritize human rights and the value of
Mm.
human life first and foremost. And whatever the consequences, at least we have our integrity.
Yeah.
And these are all things that the neoliberal system doesn't allow for,
Mm-hmm.
where if every decision is based on free market principles, and this goes back actually a long time. My dad dug out an article from the early 90s of the Irish front page on the Irish newspaper of Ireland buying ammunition from Israel. And this was shortly after the brutal Israeli invasion and during the continued occupation of southern Lebanon. And there was significant opposition to buying ammunition from Israel even then.
Yeah.
Yet, free market principles were followed, and look where we are 30 years later as a result, because there was no accountability.
Mm.
So, if you were to actually have true democracy, we would have no connection with Israel. We would
Yes.
have no complicity. All of the things that we are begging politicians for, we would have had the whole time. So I think trying to figure out how we implement this somewhat prefiguratively is one part of the struggle. So in the last few years, they've actually done a few citizens' assemblies, for example, on
Mm-hmm.
gathering the population and sample sizes and getting them to be able to decide on specific topics that they've been somewhat educated on and able to come to a decision on. So I think this is one potential avenue that people can fight for in terms of how do we actually regain democracy.
Yeah.
Another is just in general, I think, in the capitalist business structure. Um, and with that, a big reason why people are afraid to speak out is often because they're working for a company that they think might fire them if they speak out.
Yes, that's huge.
And they're also working with companies that are directly complicit. Uh, and this also means that within this structure, this is a completely hierarchical dictatorship, any sort
Mm-hmm.
of corporate business model that they're going to be in. And this is where people spend most of their lives. There's no semblance of democracy. And
Mm-hmm.
I think something I've seen a lot living in Catalonia is they have a lot of worker cooperatives that are very much run by the workers. They have gardens, they have lands that's run by the community. And through that, people actually can experience what real democracy looks like. They can understand how they can actually be a part of a decision-making process. And actually, kind of through that, it paves the way for a truer form of democracy on a societal level. The
Mm.
same thing with trade unions, where this is a way for the majority of the population, the working class of the population, to be able to actually have a collective voice. And it was the trade union movement in Ireland, really, that was the difference in ending Ireland's complicity in the South African apartheid, for example.
Yes.
So these are all ways that normal people can group together and actually have a collective voice that allows them to experience and claim democracy for themselves. Because now it's kind of become a just thing for people to say is like, yeah, well, like even Israelis, it's not us, it's the government, you know?
Yes.
And
Yes.
like, there's some truth to that. I get it because, like, we've only kind of just started to realize what our government is doing, and it's our job to try to uncover this and then use this information for change.
Mm.
So I think like these are kind of the ways we need to be thinking of how we can actually organize for power and actually try to claim some of that power back. Because when you see what's happening in the world, okay, we have a genocide that our government are happy to lie to their population about. They're happy to sell war bonds through their own central bank and vote against even having a vote in the Dáil about the war bonds that are being advertised on Israeli websites as supporting our troops in Gaza. And our government's happy to sell these. Yeah. Like
Yeah. And
we have the memory of the famine as to what a government is willing to do to maintain their profit margins. You know, under this system, there isn't necessarily any sort of cultural value or intrinsic value. It's value as decided by the market, and that's it.
yes.
So when you add in, say, for example, the climate crisis, when you add in, for example, the rearming of Europe, when you add in the rise of far-right groups, all of these things are huge potential shocks. And I think without collective power from the bottom up, these are things that can really cause huge devastation and destruction. So I think we need to be kind of planning ahead, not only in terms of how can we end our own complicity in genocide, but how do we actually get a proper seat at the table that represents the majority of the people, because our democracy is obviously not working whatsoever. And I think people in most countries around the world are kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah. There definitely seems to be just a chasm between us and the decisions our government is making on the world stage, and materially we're completely separate for it, and some kind of really anti-democratic maneuvers. And one of the biggest ones that comes to my mind in terms of, it's not in the government's interests for us to be empowered if,
Hmm.
their interests lie in, a neoliberal growth at all costs economy.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, the example of that was the adoption of the IHRA definition
Mm.
of
Mm.
anti-Semitism as soon as the government was elected.
Yeah.
No mention of it in the pre-election manifesto. And afterwards, as Niall Sargent reported in his Currency article, Micheál Martin had expressed internally that in department emails, that he was anxious to get it done as quickly as possible. So
Yeah.
here's someone who's definitely been lobbied and been put under pressure to implement this definition. And this
Yeah.
definition, for people listening, it conflates criticism and critique, which is valid, of the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. So there you have this massive chilling effect. Um, when you conflate those two things, you put the fear of God in a lot of people who mightn't be
Mm.
as well informed, maybe, or not,
Yeah.
that they'll be called an anti-Semite if, they want to
Mm.
stand up and say Israel is a settler colony, guilty of apartheid.
Hmm.
Under those definitions, you can't say such things. Which, it ends kind of academic, I suppose, expression and research. People have been
Hmm.
punished. We see where it has been used in the US, uh, there in Germany, students being deported across Europe and the US. And that is the direction our government wants to go. So I
Yeah.
think we've got to be really aware as a public that we've got to take this power back, like you said, and we've got to organize to take back that power. And we shouldn't, I suppose, fear a change in a system that isn't serving us anyway. And
Mm.
this system is leading to record homelessness. You had some really good info in the article about kind of the origin, or the starting point of, the shift from, for example, social housing, 1980s, Thatcherite reforms. The
Hmm.
public council stock was sold. And then, like, the figure in 2007, the councils were building 6,000 homes a year. And by 2014, it was down to 102.
Yeah.
So, the very basics and necessities of our lives. We need shelter. We need a place to
Yeah.
call home.
Yeah.
We don't even have fair access to those things.
Hmm.
So we've got to understand that it is in our best interests, and not to kind of, I suppose, fear that, because a lot of people are bought in by government rhetoric because they're very good at
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And we do have a media that is very good at not challenging them and writing
Yeah.
puff pieces about, I suppose, their integrity. And then, we have the ditch made up of just a small team that is kind of, it feels like single handedly taking the role of, public interest journalism to try and empower. Um, so yeah, I guess it's leaning on facts over narrative and rhetoric. Like, what does the
Mhm.
evidence say? What is your quality of life looking like?
Yeah.
Um, do you think that a nation, like you said earlier, that is the richest per capita should have a housing crisis? We shouldn't have good healthcare. I spoke to a colleague who lives in Holland. She's having a baby. She was talking to me about the scale of her care. She was saying how, each one is appointed. We'd probably, an equivalent would be a public nurse. But she has someone that is going to visit her house for the first 10 days after her baby's born to cook for her, to clean for her, to tend to her, to let her nap while this nurse looks after the baby. And
Mm.
it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like, we are just herded out the door
Yeah.
as to turn over a bed as quickly as possible. And I just, to see that, it's kind of like, wow, we really haven't fought enough, I think, for the basics that other countries take for granted.
Yeah, massively, massively. And yeah, like this is something even, I mean, I left Ireland 2021, April 2021, and moved to London for maybe 5 months before coming to Barcelona. And I remember even arriving to London being like, oh my God, like they have bins for us to use.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they have a toilet. I like we've just all been all over town during the pandemic, and they've been actively removing bins and like not providing any toilets whilst telling us to be outside. And at
Yeah.
the same time, just enclosing all of the public spaces where any young people have been hanging out, turning all of the bars and clubs into hotels and offices and whatever else.
Hmm.
And it's all kind of just part of this same trend globally, where you had this kind of post World War II kind of welfare state that was relatively progressive, and then you had this kind of neoliberal shift from the 70s with like Milton Friedman ideas, Thatcher, Reagan,
Hmm.
who have kind of kickstarted this era, and now we're kind of in the kind of acceleration phase of 2.0, it
Yeah.
seems now. And all of these things like are part of this wider trend. You see it happening. I mean, they had the big win in England with the NHS, but you have private interests that are systemically dismantling that at the same
Hmm.
time to force people into private because people in private, they make a lot of money from this. Exact same thing in Ireland. There's very powerful interests in the private healthcare system that will ensure if you want to get good healthcare, you pay them for it. Yeah,
That's
like it
it.
doesn't
Yeah.
benefit them for you to have a good public health system. Same thing with education. This is something that's been consistently deprioritized now
Mm.
for 15, 20 years. And it's just all part of kind of this wider project of trying to privatize everything,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. It's
And like now it's like the case where it's tough to actually even go into town without having to spend money just to like even sit down somewhere or use a toilet. And it's part
mm,
of this kind of general thing of like, okay, if you're going to prioritize GDP and growth, then this is kind of a natural outcome of that. You have to essentially remove any sort of public space and privatize everything and let people make as much money and extract as much money as they can from the general population.
And that's it. It's this extraction, this relentless extraction. So here we are calling for services and, basic needs to be met, but it's like the government's structure doesn't exist to serve us. It exists to extract and provide opportunities for
Mm.
these winners and these,
Yeah, yeah,
top of the chain capitalists to say, oh, she has a problem. How can I profit from that problem? It's not
yeah,
how can I how can we use the public wealth to, maybe solve this problem? No, it's like there's an
yeah.
opportunity here. People need housing. Ooh, let's drive up the prices. Um, and it kind of like back to the ideology. It's this, survival of the fittest, the winner takes all mentality
Mm, mm,
that neoliberalism peddles. And it's really gross because it does value profit and status over like basic human integrity.
yeah,
And like you said in the article, it's like that kind of endless accumulation wipes out the indigeneity. Like it's the culture and the memory.
yeah.
All of that is just eroded. And I think that's why you've noticed, you mentioned at the start your own family history. I myself have discovered that through all of
Mm,
this as well. It's been beautiful, and I've met other people who have
mm,
that. Just, I suppose, as it's being wiped out and we're at the extreme end of it, there's this resurgence happening, and it's like this resistance. It's like, hang on a minute, no, like we're not having this. Um, but we've got a bit of work, I think, to do in terms of making that change systemic, getting
yeah.
organized about it. And one thing you said there that I thought was really interesting, that a friend has actually said to me a few times, was the Citizens Assembly in particular.
Mhm.
Um, this I remember like looking into this before. Isn't this something that has to be, I suppose, appointed on a government level? So
Mhm.
how would that work in practice?
Yeah. In different ways. I mean, in order for it to be, I guess, like respected as a decision, because it was actually the government, funnily enough, that did organize these citizens' assemblies already. So there was
Hmm.
a very good one already done, for example, on biodiversity. That was very successful and actually seemingly will, the recommendations from the assembly will be implemented. Um, they don't have to be organized by government, because they can be organized separately, but it just needs to be trustworthy in that they have been selected at random so that they're a representative sample of the population.
Mm.
But there is another contradiction in this because the government, in terms of most of what they're doing, is unpopular. I mean, you mentioned the IHRA definition here. Who's going to vote for that? Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm.
now this big shift of trying to get Ireland signed up to NATO, to get Irish people to fight in imperialist wars, to get our spending up to a certain percentage of our GDP, which makes no sense considering our GDP is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, is just kind of another part, firstly, because of the power of the military industrial complex in terms of lobbies. Secondly, in terms of our general subservience to the US as well as to the EU in some ways. And when you actually look at the numbers, it's about three-quarters of the Irish population that want to preserve neutrality. It's about three-quarters of the Irish
Yes.
population that wanted the Occupied Territories Bill pushed through in its pure form. It's a similar amount who even want to cut trade with Israel full stop. Yeah.
Mm.
So all
Mm-hmm.
of these
Mm-hmm.
things aren't going to be things that the government are going to organize
Exactly.
citizens' assemblies around. At
Mm-hmm.
the same time, it's still a powerful tool to be able to say to them, you are acting completely undemocratically. You're meant to represent our views and you're not. And this is something that can, at the very least, create pressure. And that pressure is what it is, has at least allowed the government to, or forced the government into making some sort of concessions at the very least. I mean, compared to other European politicians, mostly because of how corrupt they are. Like somehow the Irish government and politicians have actually been able to say and do a little bit more than a lot of them. But
Mm.
in general, we now are in a position where essentially everywhere on earth we now understand we don't have anything close to democracy. The thing
Yeah.
was, it just wasn't as obvious before because it wasn't a streamed genocide that people were
Mm.
talking about. It was something a little bit harder for people to put their finger on. And also, um, at the same time, you essentially have every government complicit in war crimes who are
Mm.
actively breaking international law. And that's like the thing now in Ireland. You have Micheál Martin and Simon Harris both saying Israel is committing genocide, and on the same day voting against ending the sale of genocide bonds through their own central
Yes.
bank, you know?
Yes.
And these are all things that are kind of easy to move past, but at the same time, they exist on record now. People know this. People know what they've
Mm.
done. And when we're kind of thinking about how we push the movement further forward, typically when significant change happens is when these sort of contradictions become overly antagonistic. People can no longer ignore them. It's clear what's happening and that the government are not acting in their best interest or the best interests of humanity as a whole. They have their
Mm-hmm.
corporate overlords. This is who they're serving. And that's
Yes.
obvious now in terms of the health care system, in terms of housing, in terms of international relations, complicity in genocide, and abandoning Ireland's supposed
Neutrality.
neutrality,
Yeah.
which is something else I wanted to talk about a bit today, because I feel like this kind of neutrality word is kind of getting thrown around a lot.
Mm.
And you mentioned at the start of the article, even like this neutrality was already non-existent considering we're
Mm.
occupied by a NATO imperialist country already, the
Yes.
six counties.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
We've had US soldiers using Shannon Airport
Yeah.
essentially as a military base for 20 years. There's been, I think, over 3 million US soldiers who have passed through Shannon since the Iraq War, which is just insane to think about. How many
Mm.
war criminals have flown through Shannon Airport? How many pieces of military equipment have flown through? I mean, thankfully, again, because of the ditch, we're starting to understand what's actually happening
Yes.
at Shannon Airport or what's happening in our airspaces. But this
Mm-hmm.
idea of neutrality, we have to understand that's already gone. Like,
Yeah, the pure in the purest sense, it is of course gone.
yeah,
Yeah, we are complicit. I think we need to first have that understanding, and then we need to save what's left of it. And I suppose the
fight
triple
for
lock,
true neutrality
it's what?
and fight for true neutrality.
And fight for true neutrality, absolutely. And like we have some really brave activists who are putting a huge spotlight at that, at huge personal risk, that we all, I suppose, need to support
Yeah,
and defend, because when you see the media coverage it, they forget, it slips their mind to put in the context that these were principled actions that had a clear purpose. They just remove that and they go for a cheap headline about how
yeah,
they breached a fence and it was just a plane, not a military plane. Or do you want to
yeah,
maybe mention the weapons inside? Okay, we'll leave that. And you
yeah,
kind of see how the system kind of self perpetuates through a complicit media, and you think, shit, the scale of this is huge. Like,
yeah,
but on the triple lock, I mean, this has got to be the biggest one. You mentioned there about how, fiscal rules are broken at an EU level. Ursula von der Leyen came out and she broke fiscal rules so we can all, increase. Let's go mad. Let's
yeah,
go spend, 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 because,
yeah,
Ireland has wars to fight, like seriously. And
yeah,
again, it's a working class issue, because who
yeah,
are they targeting in their advertisements? I
yeah,
have been putting a spotlight on where they're advertising and how they're doing it, and the emotional hooks they're using to lure people in. Um,
yeah,
and it's always working class areas. You'll see them on bus stops outside schools in working class areas, or
mhm,
you'll have this horrible kind of marketing, be more. And it's like, be more. Oh, because the starting assumption is that, you need to make something of yourself. You're not doing very much,
yeah,
are you? Um, And then they increase the starting salary to 42k, and basically the removal of the triple lock for people listening will mean that we don't need a UN mandate to send troops to wars. So, you know, I had the Accidental Rapper on the podcast a while back, and he like gave some brilliant information on that. Basically, we can join illegal wars, NATO
Yeah.
wars. It's kind of it's further assimilation into the empire. And I mean, a neutrality, which is such another key part of Irish identity, just being
Hmm.
eroded and sucked away. And you have a narrative that isn't explaining that or contextualizing that. You have a narrative publicly that's like, Russia can't be vetoing us at the UN. We can't be having that. And it is no more about a Security Council veto than the man in the moon. But this is how it happens, and this is how you get a public to consent unwittingly to these things. And it's like, knowledge is power, and now is the time for us to, I suppose, take hold of that knowledge, that power, inform ourselves, and not fall foul to the blah blah blah, as you said,
Yeah.
rhetoric coming out of their mouths, the denial. Like, from my local TDs, the responses when we asked them, why did you vote down Sinn Féin's motion to end the sale of war bonds? And they're saying legal reasons. They can't even explain it themselves. And you're thinking,
No.
no, there is no legal basis. Um,
Yeah. Just
uh,
lies.
but that's it. But you see, there's this bamboozling that happens. And the average person might lose a bit of confidence in that exchange, because I'd often
Yeah.
have people that would come to me and say, like, what is he saying? I don't understand. And that's
Mm.
the whole point of his response, is to elicit that response in a person. I don't get
Yeah.
it. It's too complex. It isn't.
Mm. Yeah.
There's no get out clause under the Genocide Convention for
Yeah.
financial interests. It doesn't
Yeah.
say, well, actually, none of this applies if your financial interests are are at risk.
Exactly.
It,
And they use this like with the Occupied Territories bill saying, oh,
mm,
it goes against EU law. All of
yes,
that just turned out to be lies. And then
yes.
like they go and pass it only with goods, saying that it's genocide, UN saying it's illegal occupation, and then the government essentially saying, well, services though, kind of fine. You
Because
know,
that's
like
the
they
biggest
admit the
part,
flaw.
and
Yeah,
that's the biggest part. That's where the money is. Come on, you know,
yeah,
we're just
yeah,
trying to
yeah.
give you a bit, like Liam Cunningham said, we're just giving you a bit of tinsel. Would you not just take it? The
Yeah,
Palestinian ambassador is happy with me. And
yeah.
no journalist has clapped back at him. Every time he says this, the silence falls, and you're just waiting for the
Mm,
journalist to say, is she happy for Shannon to be used for the
mm,
transport of weapons? Is she happy for Ireland to be certifying the war bonds? Have you
yeah.
asked her, you know, and putting him on the spot, because it's so sinister, like that Ireland is the least worst, and that, you know, we deserve a clap in the back for that. It's like, oh, we only do a little bit as supporting genocide, and like it's just horrible.
Yeah,
Um, but it's getting that awareness, and we're fighting a media that actively obscures um that clarity.
yeah.
And I think that's one of my personal missions. And when I read an article like yours, it's like it's just the clarity that comes through. So thank you so much for that, and for putting it all together and tying it together, because that's what we need to be doing more of,
Mm,
and just being able to call them out. And I think another key element is our mentality, our general mentality as a people, and what I
mm,
and we always refer to as parish politics. Um,
yeah,
we vote for the TD who has, oh, he got me on a waiting list to get a house.
yeah.
And, you know, he's the reason there's a waiting list, and you don't owe him your vote. You already pay his wage through taxation. He's
Yeah.
throwing you scraps. He's denied you the loaf. Do you
Mm,
know, you don't owe him anything. And I think like that mentality can kind of hark back to maybe the days of British rule, and maybe there was some kind of favoritism or select favors going on, and it's like,
mm,
keep quiet now. You're after getting a favor there now that not
yeah.
everyone gets. And we've just got to rise above it all, and really see through it. But one thing I suppose would be really good to end on is a vision for how it could be different. And, you know, if things were perfect, and if we had an
Mm,
empowered and informed population, what way would we be going and what would we be doing?
Hmm. Well, always ultimately it would have to be a 32 county socialist republic, as was
Yeah,
the vision of James Connolly.
yeah.
Um, and in general, I think like what Ireland has really failed to do with all of these technology companies and all of this money coming in is like actually building infrastructure, housing, and investing in things that actually make Ireland sovereign and resilient in the long term. Because right now we really have very little to show for all this wealth as a general population or as a country. Like our transport systems are terrible, our healthcare systems are terrible, our housing system is a complete failure, our agriculture system is really not much more resilient than it was 150 years ago, 170 years ago. And I think, given the scale of shocks and change we are going to collectively face, even as a species, over the next couple of decades, we
Mm,
haven't even really begun to comprehend yet. So, what I think the priority should be now is while the technology companies are here, take advantage of this and really kind of work prefiguratively towards what a kind of resilient and regenerative economy can actually look like, one that is sovereign and isn't as easily controlled by any particular country like the US or like England in the past, through any
mhm,
particular corporations that have such outsized influence on the well-being of a whole country, and through that also diversifying as well.
mhm,
So with that then, so like the things we mentioned earlier in terms of like reinvigorating the trade union movement, trying to reinvigorate democracy through citizens' assembly, rethinking business models in terms of cooperatives, reinvigorating communities too, because I feel that's also a very deliberate part of neoliberal strategy is to individualize you and through that
mm,
make you forget your own power as well. Everybody says, "Oh, I feel so hopeless and powerless, we can't change anything." And that's deliberate, yeah?
yeah.
And through that, then I think we need to make sure that as best as possible, because right now we're talking about Israel.
Mhm.
Really, what the big conversation should be about is the US. I mean,
Yeah.
look what they really have been doing since the Geneva Convention, since the UN. I mean, they
Yes.
never stopped committing war crimes, whether it's in
No.
Vietnam, Iraq, Gaza, wherever. And even look what they're doing to their own populations now in terms of kidnapping, detaining, deporting them to El Salvador. I mean, everyone can see very clearly the direction that that
It's
country
not
is going
far.
in, and it's not
Yes.
pretty. And I think our dependence on US tech corporations is a big point of fragility for us as a country, and something we really need to try our best to divest from sooner rather than later. Because something else, even, and another kind of point of intersectionality with regards to complicity in genocide with Israeli companies, US tech firms, and something that we haven't really begun to properly grasp yet is energy consumption, particularly when artificial intelligence comes in. And also
Yes.
what happens to employment in the tech sector. We've already seen huge redundancies already because of AI. Fast forward 10 years, Bill Gates says we barely need any humans. And I think that's something else we need to also be prepared for. What happens when all of this gets automated? What happens when data centers are using, it's projected even in a few years, a third of our energy during a climate crisis, while fossil fuels are getting more expensive, energy prices are already skyrocketing. So these are all things we really need to be preparing in advance for. And under the current structure, as we've seen, we actually can't take any meaningful action to adapt under the capitalist system as
Mhm.
is. So I
Mhm.
think we need a roadmap of sorts that we can actually work towards step by step in terms of being able to regain our democracy, regain our sovereignty, build resiliency, build the capacity to adapt to shocks and ultimately actually be independent from countries that are responsible for genocides, war crimes, and atrocities throughout the world and have been for 70 years plus now, really. So I think these are really the ways we need to be thinking.
Hmm.
And I think it's becoming increasingly clear for so many of us that like so much of this starts really with like breaking these chains of Zionism as I don't know if you know the people of Social Rights Ireland.
I do. Roisin.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I
She's
really like that
powerhouse.
slogan, break the chains of
That's
Zionism.
right. Yeah.
And
She's been in my mind as you were talking there. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so through that, I've been really happy to see, for example, the likes of Palestine Action Ireland, Mothers Against Genocide, Pal
Hmm.
Action Era, and a few of these groups that are kind of escalating these pressures because I think it's been made obvious to all of us that rhetoric has been a failure in terms of focusing on this, and we really need to shift focus towards material structures.
Yes.
And we need to then shift our activism towards disrupting those at the same time. So in my article, I mentioned not only the likes of Apple, Google, Amazon, Intel, etc., but also for Irish companies that are also directly supplying the Israeli military,
Hmm.
Accra Control and Clonski.
Yeah.
There's actually going to be a protest in the coming days outside there, which is
Yeah.
great. I haven't seen one organized there before. There's Powell Electronics in Kildare. They're
They
sending
were
nearly
descended
five.
upon shortly
Oh,
after the
brilliant,
ditch article, and there was a
brilliant.
brilliant action there. And they came out and said, "We're ending our exports too." They were horrified. They were
Brilliant.
caught.
That's
But it
Powell
just goes,
Electronics.
that's
Yeah,
right. But it just goes to show how little they get exposed. That,
yeah.
the result was so quick when you had a group of fiery, brilliant activists standing outside, roaring and
Mhm.
chanting, and identifying them, taking them out of their
Brilliant.
comfort zone. So it was like, and there have been amazing instances of that. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I think it's we can't vote our way out of this because
Hmm.
we're going to we've got to fundamentally change, and to do that we need a re-education,
Yeah,
um, and that's going to have to happen in community.
yeah,
And that's going to have to happen by coming together and uniting, for our common interests. And I suppose for the integrity of who we are as human beings with
yeah,
very basic, I suppose, morals that have been utterly just betrayed,
yeah.
by the government. Do you see? I don't know. I don't want you to kind of pin your kind of colors to any party or anything, but in terms of, where people or what people should look to when they are voting, come voting time,
Hmm.
based on the options that we have. It's been said, at least, the left in Ireland is quite disorganized.
Hmm.
It's never had a chance at power. We've been ruled by Fianna Fáil
Hmm.
and Fine Gael for 100 years.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, in terms of that and pointers for people
Hmm.
when they're considering.
Yeah, I think like firstly, there was a list after this vote that voted against the prevention of the central bank selling the Israeli war bonds. I
Yep.
think everybody should make sure to check that list first and foremost and make sure to
Hmm.
never give any one of those genocidal politicians a vote ever again as a
Yes.
starting point.
And just
And
before you go on, I just want to just
mhm,
really make it clear that the reason why you can't say, but genocide is the crime of crimes. If
yeah,
you demonstrate that your morality is so absent that you could actually vote against, the stopping of war bonds, you've said all there is to say. So yeah, that's
yeah.
that's brilliant, and there's a lot of clarity in that. But yeah, go on.
Exactly, because like actually they're war criminals. There's no actual
Yes.
two ways about that. They're legally obliged to do everything in their power to prevent this, and they
Hmm.
have actually done the opposite.
Yes.
Past that point, I wouldn't necessarily endorse a particular political party. I
Hmm.
think there's people that I like a lot across a few different parties, from
Hmm.
People Before Profit to Sinn Féin. At the
Me
same
too.
time, there's also things within every party that I think everybody will have an issue with here or there or
Yeah,
not. And it really has to just come down to ensuring that we are strategic in voting against Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and also if it seems like there's going to be a party that might prop up one of those two,
independence.
because that's been the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, so
Hmm.
independents, also Labour and Sinn Féin
That's right.
weren't ready to say that they wouldn't have done that. And
Mm.
for that reason, I also was reluctant to vote for either of them. So I
They
think
need to rule out any kind of a coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. That is a must. They need to,
exactly,
and they need to not shy away from that. And the media will
exactly.
do its usual thing. Are you not serious about going into government? How can you say you wouldn't? No,
Yeah,
we don't want any shade of neoliberal politics in our country anymore. It has destroyed, um, it has destroyed the country in the
yeah.
ways that matter the most. So yeah, that's a really good rule of thumb that the party has declared that they won't, under any circumstances, go in with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, because in all likelihood, the government will be formed by a coalition of left wing parties if we are to see the end of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
Yeah, inshallah.
Inshallah, I love it. I've picked up a um, few Arabic words. Ahmadillah, yeah, it's great. Like the amount of awareness that I suppose we've all grown in. For our Muslim friends, like before, we were so conditioned post 9/11. Not all of us, obviously, but in the
Mhm.
mainstream. To really kind of fear it. We'd hear the term Allah Akbar, which is like praise be to God, and think it was like a
Yeah,
terrorist chant because that's how
yeah,
it's
yeah,
portrayed. And it's like it's actually the most beautiful thing. And it's
yeah, yeah.
like, oh my God, how do they manage to flip these things?
Imagine
Um,
Irish mammies were being called terrorists for saying praise be to God.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. Like they got
Mhm.
into us, like, and or tried, but that is all broken down now. So, as grim as things are, and they are grim, and we have more on the way, I think there's a lot of beauty to be reclaimed in what we're retrieving. That some of us didn't even really know that we had lost, and there's an
Mhm.
awful lot of power in that. Um, and I suppose the more connected we are to the memory of our past, our ancestors, the more emboldened we are to believe that, look, change, of course, is possible.
Mhm.
um, but what we need is, I guess, to unite and to learn, to finally learn not to listen to the bull and the, people talking out of both sides of their mouth, and to
Yeah,
understand that this system cannot save us because this system is designed to serve an elite few in the kind of unfettered growth of their wealth and personal interest. It
yeah,
isn't designed to serve us and our basic needs. Our taxation is just a way for them to extract and design a system that serves them. And, I think Irish people say, what are you talking about? It's not that bad. Or, it
yeah,
is. And the facts should speak for themselves.
yeah,
Go try and go to
exactly.
the hospital and see how long you're on a trolley for,
Yeah.
and ask yourself, is there any need in a nation as wealthy as Ireland? Where
Mhm.
are the American tech companies when you're lying on a trolley, or
Exactly.
the benefits of them? And just try and, yeah, bring it all together. Um, but yeah, I look forward to reading a lot more from you, Dara. Um,
Thank you.
and yeah, I think a lot of people will. Do you write regularly with Counterpunch, or where else can we see your work and follow you?
Yeah, counterpunch is where really. And yeah, I basically now, because so I work over here as a professor in a university, so
Hmm.
I basically have like so much content within lecture slides that like I've been working on for the last few years. And
Hmm.
yeah, so now the semester's finished, so I'm basically just trying to convert those into articles week by week as I go. So on
Brilliant.
Counterpunch, you can just kind of click into my profile and just see what goes up there, basically.
Yeah. And in terms of social media, you're on Instagram. I found you on Instagram, so we can
Yeah,
follow you there. And I don't know, do you do Twitter or X? I tend to
Twitter, no,
I
but I
tend to say it.
actually
Yeah.
like strangely also use LinkedIn just because I feel it was just far too silent on the genocide in
Mm,
Gaza. And I kind of just said to myself, if I am trying to disrupt business as usual, I shouldn't not post on LinkedIn. So it's kind of
hmm.
like I almost kind of feel like kind of contradictory, like posting like about anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism on LinkedIn, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah.
owned by Microsoft. But
You're
anyway,
opening
I also
minds.
do that.
Yeah. We got to work with what we have and where we are. But yeah,
Exactly.
that's great because yeah, people have, taken a lot of value, and it just goes to show the ripple effect that an article like yours can have, and what it can do to empower people, and
Mm,
clarify things, because clarity is essential for
yeah.
what's coming. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was really lovely to have you on.